to Men Hurt 2, a series brought to you by hashtag Coffee with T. And I'm T. I'm so excited to be here. You guys know that I'm really excited about helping men heal. So I started the series Men Hurt 2 so that we could get an inside look at what it feels like to be a Black man, what it is that we don't understand about them. So who better to tell us than Black men? So I've got one of the most amazing Black men on today. He is my friend. He is my mentor. I learned so much from him. His name is William Michael Barbee. William is a Black Newark native and was educated in the Newark public school system. He attended Arts High School, Jersey City College, majoring in biology with a minor in fine arts. Rutgers University, graduating with a degree in business management, McAllister American Academy of Mortuary Science, graduating with a diploma in mortuary science and funeral services. During the summer of 1980, and upon entering Arts High School, the Barbee family was the victim of an arson fire. As a result, William Michael's family was permanently displaced and separated. The toll of those and others events would forever change his life. He attended his first 2 years of high school as a homeless teen, with donated clothing from friends and strangers, and with vouchers from the Salvation Army and the Goodwill Mission. As a direct result of the fire, watching childhood friends die to street violence, drug abuse, disease, and depression, William Michael suffered many levels of post-traumatic stress. And we're going to stop there on his bio because it's so much more.
It's about to make me cry.
Every time I think about it, I'm going to cry. So it's so important to talk about this topic today. And today we're talking about mental health because I think that he is an expert on this. And he tried to tell me at the beginning, I'm not clinically, but listen, experience is the mother of all teachers. I would much rather, not that I'm saying I won't go to a therapist because I've been to a therapist, but going to somebody who has experienced what I'm going through and a therapist helps so much more. I've learned so much from things that I went through from people who actually experienced it because they were less judgmental. So, every session when I come on and I talk to my men, I always ask them about their background. So you got to tell us a little bit about your mom and a little bit about your dad.
Well, first, thank you for having me. You're drinking that dirty water. I better drink mine. You did say mental health, right? Well, first, thanks for having me. This is my second time on your show, and I'm so humbled by the invitation, but yet proud of you because I've watched your journey and a lot of success you've had. I remember the first interview that we had. It was around 7 years ago when I wrote Clip Wings, They Do Fly.
Yes.
And you were working with the Movement magazine at the time.
Yeah.
And we did this whole big spread and stuff. So, I'm very grateful. And then our friendship goes way beyond that day. But let me say this. I had a wonderful childhood, like most folks who, a lot of times when people say you grow up poor, they associate that with bad. But, your family is your community is your family. And so I didn't have a bad community. Inside of that community, there are things that happened, people we met, good, bad, and indifferent. And so within that, we had a immediate family, a foundation with a mother, a father, and I had brothers and sisters. So as a child, I was a mama's boy. And now as a man, I'm a mama's man. And, as I look at my relationship with my mother, she was always there. It was just last week we were talking and, I said, Mom, I think I finally found my voice. Here it is, I'm 54 years old. I think I found my voice. She said, no, Mike, you always had a voice. It's just you didn't like hearing it.
Wow.
And so now that I got to a point of understanding purpose, my mission in life, to leave more than you take, walking in that mantra, I'm starting to really shape hope because those who knew me from my childhood would say Mike Barbee would never speak publicly. I was shy. I hid under my mother. And part of that was the other side, which was my father, who was a very militant man. And so his militancy was not working well for me, the artist. And because I was sensitive, I had the softer need for compassion and I needed to understand why. And while the militancy that he projected, it scared me and frightened me. So
Mm,
early in life, I didn't have a great relationship with my father. Actually, if truth be told, since we're being honest and we want to work through things, I
yes.
hated my father, and that's how I felt as a child.
Wow.
Because I remember, being in church, growing up in church. You fear God, and I didn't understand that concept because I feared my father. And how can
Mm,
I love God? How can I love my father? And so I never understood that correlation until I got older, in something called reverence. And so with my dad, I had to start understanding some of his trauma, some of the things he had gone through,
mm.
to see how they come present in today's life with me as a child back then. So it would take me going through some real strong bumps and stuff. And it was after I ended up hospitalized, counselor with therapy at the age of 20, 21. And before I started getting on my journey, I started understanding the wounded child that he grew up from that never healed. And so that child
Oh,
was always in him crying out as an adult. And so
wow.
with me going through my changes, being forced into counseling and therapy and having to deal with my ills and taking ownership of who William Michael Barbee is, I got to understand that little child in me who I kept hidden and wounded and hurt. And there was one day we had I always feared this man. And at the age of 20, somewhere around 2021, he and I had a clash for the first time in our
Mm,
lives. And when I say clash, it wasn't physical, but there was physical intimidation that he was projecting on me. And I had to respond because I felt like a dog up against a wall. And it was
wow.
almost in that physical structure. And as a child, we look at our parents as these bigger than life people, but my father was really 5'2", 5'2" and a half.
Mm.
Um, and even though I'm looking down at this man, he was intimidating me. And it wasn't until that little boy in me called Mickey saw the little boy in him called Donnie that he flinched. Because
Wow.
at some point, when my boy saw his boy, I rose up. And it was the first time I saw him blink. And
Wow.
when he blinked, he stepped back. And from that day forward, that's what led me over the edge because I wasn't prepared emotionally for dealing with the impact of such a strong body of a person, spiritually, mentally, confronting me. And it happened to be my father. And so it would take some therapy, 2 years of therapy, and additional help before my father became my best friend for the first time. So as an adult, my father and I had the best relationship from the age, I guess, of 24, 23, 24, up until my 40s when he died. We
Wow.
had the best relationship. And so it was because I understood him. And I remember when I was in the hospital and there was a no visitation rule back then. There was one visitor that my doctor allowed in there was him. And that's
Wow.
when I heard for the first time an apology. And so when you look at oh, you make me cry. Mm.
It's okay.
But when you look at the dynamics of relationships and you look at how we all grow up, often we don't address our childhood trauma. And you talked about early post-traumatic stress disorder when you was reading the bio, but it's so true. We normalize these conditions in society, and the reality is that we shouldn't, and we shouldn't have to. And
Right.
so as we get older, the hope is that we've healed somewhere along the line
Mm.
and that we're able to take that healing power and share it with someone else so that they don't have to go through what you've been through. So
Wow.
that's a relationship. So today I'm a mama's man, and I'm an example of all my mom and dad represents. So I love them both with all my heart.
That is awesome.
Tea
Listen,
time.
yeah, listen, it's we have to hear this from you guys, from the Black men, because we are judgmental. We are we can be torturing to you guys. because we don't understand that you had this conflict as a child, that you had this inner thing going on within you, that you had to confront your monster. And we understanding now that your monster was your dad gives me a whole nother view of who you are. And not that your dad was a monster, but his trauma was undealt with. So this is the stuff we want to do. Broken boys become broken men. So we want to
Yeah,
start
agree. Yeah.
with you guys teaching us so that we don't break our sons. Because I have a 25-year-old who I broke, and I take ownership of that. And we had the same conversation, me and him, so he was able to heal. But in society, does mental health fall on deaf ears when it comes to Black men?
Yes, I strongly believe it. I know not only deaf ears because of the stigmas that are out. And if we look historically within the Black community, how we viewed mental health, if we go back to Africa and we look at historically what happened there, you were shunned, stoned, different things that happened. And so as we move it up, we look at how African Americans have had to look at institutions. I'm writing this new book now. I'm almost finished. It's called The Perfect Storm, a collision of three elements: racism, Trump, and COVID. And what I tie into how Trump has been influential in all of those and used all of those things, and it hasn't been for the good. And as I was researching the experience of African Americans or Africans coming into America through the Portuguese, the Spaniards back um, in the early 1500s into North American territories, I think about the trauma that they went through. And so when we talk about do African American males have a predisposition to certain things when it comes to mental health? Yeah, we have stigmas. Community hasn't embraced it. When we look at institutions have vilified us. And it's the institutions that have criminalized us. And so now that we're looking at being criminalized, degraded, and falsely put into these vacuums where we don't have the freedom to express ourselves. I think about my father. He was such an important factor in my life. And I love the journey. I love the fact that I went through a journey, not the journey that I went through, but I love the lessons and the tools and everything I learned. And when I think about my father, who was born in the segregated South in 1931 and came to Richmond, Virginia at the age of 5 through his whole high school years living in Richmond and watching segregation during those times. And as he got older, he went to the Korean War and came back, and he was still a nigger in the eyes of the white man. I look at him being a product of a father who was a pretty boy who was on the road, and a mother who was chasing after the husband. So my father was raised by his auntie. Wow. And his auntie raised him. So I have to think that the man that my father became was one who dealt with abandonment issues and some forms of neglect, and out of his words, abuse. And so when we look at those dynamics that he endured, and he still had to come fight in a war, still be called the nigger, joined the NAACP, fight for the rights of people. And all of his career, he was a union organizer and a negotiator for unions and people's rights. And I say all of that to say, in spite of all of that, he still had to be a father to 5 kids with 5 different personalities. He still had to be a husband to a wife, the same one wife. He still had to be a cousin and leader in the community. So when I look at that and all that he had to carry, I wonder why he never sought help. And we got to look historically, it wasn't readily available back then. And so in our African American experience, we pray things out or we will things out, and we just know it's going to go away. But the reality is that it never goes away. Dr. John Bradshaw talks about the infancy syndrome, and he says we're all just older children, and unless we address those issues from our childhood, will continue to live out through that child lens. And I just paraphrased it, but we're just older children with wounded hearts, and we need to heal in order to be a better person to others and to be a positive contribution to society.
I love it. So it for me, it said I wanted to ask, what does, because I know you suffer and you share openly about mental illness, post traumatic stress disorder, and things that happen along your childhood, from having a fire in your home to being displaced for your whole high school years, and just that
First
right.
2 years we were homeless.
Yeah, just being homeless and while you're in high school, like that's a lot. So what does mental illness look like in black men? One, because maybe a black man doesn't know he's suffering from mental illness because we are in a society where we've made it that it's normal for black men to suffer. So what does mental illness look like in a black man, if for the men who are listening who may not know what this thing is inside of him?
Well, let me say this, being an advocate for the mental health community, mental health goes beyond color, race, creed, religion, faith, political parties. However, in the African American experience here in America, we have experiences that no other group of people have ever endured. This is the land of our atrocities. And so, what does mental health look like? It looks in every form. I mean, you can have the typical person who we may view, oh, something's wrong with that person, and we would see outward signs of schizoaffective behavior. We see different things. But then you have the doctor who just can't cope, or you have the business leader in his community who just keeps falling on hard times in spite the successes he's having. And so mental health has a plethora, so many variables and so many different looks. Look at me. Folks who don't know my past, they see this very successful businessman. He's owned these companies, traveled the world 10 times over, but they don't know that I deal with mental health issues. And just recent with this pandemic, prior to the pandemic, um, I was fine. I'm the guy who's writing books. What's in your bag? Unpacking one item at a time, and clip wings, they do fly, and now writing other things that's going to empower people. I was fine giving advice, helping people, advocate for the mental health community. But when this pandemic hit, I ran into something new. I ran into anxieties. I never knew what anxieties were. I mean, I've heard it, sure. I've advocated for people who have the right to express themselves and need services. I've gone down to Washington, D.C. With the Mental Health Association to fight the President Donald Trump for not cutting Medicaid budget by $800 million. I'm on the front line doing all these things, but I never knew that this phone here would be the cause of so much anxiety. That television would be the cause of so much anxiety. And it was all because I started losing so many people due to the coronavirus. And I remember it was at the time, maybe 3 months ago, it was maybe 34 people. And over time, sure, it's going up over 40 people. And I was like, oh my goodness, one person to lose that many people who he's known, whose houses he's been in, people he's loved. And that was me. And so what happened for me and what mental illness looked like, it was every time this phone rang, it was always bad news. Every time I turned on the television, it was always bad news. And so for me, what mental health looked like, what mental illness started looking like, my weight, I started losing weight. And so people see me cycling, and they see me doing the walks with the Artside alumni and leading all these people walking and stuff. But the reality, my weight initially, the first 10 pounds fell off when we were in the midst of this pandemic. And so I ended up asking one of the things I own is a mental health clinic, substance abuse, substance misuse clinic as well. And so I started asking some of the counselors about how do you deal, or what would you say to a friend who you see is going through, every time the phone rings, they cry. People call them, they cry. And they're going through this stuff, stressing because they lost so many people. And I started listening to their advice, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is stuff I know. This is the reason why I started the company 11 years ago. And I had to apply all of the lessons to myself. So the first thing I had to do was disengage from the television and all forms of media. I needed to filter and cleanse my spirit. And part of cleansing my spirit was getting rid of all of the excess stuff that just doesn't matter. And once I was able to disengage, then I was able to engage one step at a time. And so for me, mental health or mental illness was starting to look like something I wasn't used to, which was anxiety. I didn't know I was going to lose weight. But as my weight started coming off, I was like, oh my goodness, I like this. So I started eating better. And so my diet was important for my mental health and wellness. I started exercising. Exercise runs hand in hand with your mental wellness. So when you add your diet, exercise, and your spirituality, I was on the stage to recovery. Prior to that, what it looked like for me, the phone would ring, I would cry. I'd be on the phone with someone talking, I'd start crying. Not even know why. People call me just to say, hey, Mike, how you doing? I've been watching the news. New York is a hot spot. How are you doing? I'm in tears. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to pull it together, because sometimes people who don't get that opportunity to see your vulnerabilities were being accessible to mine. And I felt bad, because I was like, I don't go that deep with you now, but for some reason I couldn't control it, and it would come out. So it looks different for many of us. Some people, they eat a lot. You see it in the weight. Others, they lose it. Some you see with anger issues. Some people have shorter tempers. Some people are quiet. A lot of folks who deal with a lot of mental health issues like to be by themselves. The rooms are often dark, and so people sleep longer. Sometimes you can't sleep at all, so mental health, particularly in African American community, when you look at everything that's happening in society, you also have to look from a historical perspective of the things that we had to endure, and top of that, put that on top of everything else. And so mental health in the African American community is vast, and it's unfortunate, because then we're dealing with an administration that doesn't value those things, let alone value the African American body. And so when we have to add all these things, don't let me keep talking.
No, go ahead.
No, that's what happened last time.
Over here, because you said a few key things that I need, not only everybody here, but I need Black men to hear. Through your vulnerability, this is going to help somebody get help. If it's one person, then we did our job. If it's 1,000 people, but for me, one's good. One person listening and says, wow, because you said, I deal with, not I dealt with. So I need people to understand that there are things that trigger you still in life, that
Sure.
still go and get help, to ask your counselors, listen, something's going on here. I don't necessarily have to say it's me, but how do you deal with this? Because I've dealt with anxiety too, through a breakup, and the phone would just make my whole body, everything in me would just lose it. And I was like, what is this? And my niece suffers with, mental health issues, and she's very open about it. She's open about, sometimes you need medication. Don't let people tell you don't. Sometimes it's a therapist. So she's very aware, but she's talking about anxiety. And I'm like, you're doing too much. You're overreacting. Stop it. Until I experienced it. And I was like, oh, like I never even thought. So what you're saying makes so much sense. And I just need people to understand that it doesn't just go away. There may be something that brings it back up. Even after you think you've gone to the therapist, right? And you've done all of this work. COVID triggered you. The deaths of your friends and family who you triggered you. So I want people to understand it's okay to get help again. So you have the movie, Clip Wings, They Do Fly Beyond the Silence. You have your books that you're writing. We get help. Why didn't you just go get your own help and say, okay, I got my help. I'm not worried about everybody else. Why was it important for you to help the community and to help those around you?
I think as my mom and I was talking, I'd never liked hearing my voice, and I didn't even think I had a voice. I always hid behind my brother Mark Barbee's voice because he was an extrovert. I was an introvert, and I started realizing that what he was saying really doesn't represent my view. We laugh, we hang out together, we do all this stuff. I said, no, no, no. I need to speak up for myself. So I started years ago speaking up for myself. And from owning companies, I realized that so many of us in our community are hurting. And I used to have a joke within myself. I said, well, anybody work for Mike Barbee must have some issues going on. Um, and so I only said that in a very joking way. But what I recognize is that for me, knowing what I've been through and being able to have the levels of success, I know I'm blessed. I must first say that I've been truly blessed to live this life, walk in this frame, and to have the successes that I've had. I've been blessed. But I must say, it was watching so many people who worked for me with their brokenness that forced me to want to speak up more.
Right.
And so when you're seeing this in the African American community, um, I liken everything to when I went skydiving for the first time. And I remember I was on a suicide mission for the most part, and I really didn't care if the parachute opened. And I was doing all this money and stuff, but I was still fighting the government. And it's like the more you work, the harder it is for you when you're a business owner in the inner city, because you have fees, you have insurance that is triple the amount that someone up in Morris County is paying, and it's for the same services. And then when someone like me try to move up there, it's to this day, you still have some areas of redlining, even though people don't like talking about that. And so, or they make it more difficult for you to buy up in certain areas. And so for me, as I was like um, going up in the airplane, I just amassed all my problems. And I said, like Steve Harvey said, you just have to leap. So and this was before Steve Harvey, when I did my, so he may have gotten that from me. So when I went up in the plane and I looked at carrying all of my problems, and I looked at as I was with the jumper on my back, and when we fell out the plane, no, not fell. Well, the plane does this, and you fall. Yeah, you fell out the plane, and I looked at the world as like this big place where I have to choose where I'm going to land. But at the time, I really didn't care. But I had all these reservations, fears, but I was angry, and I just wanted to cast all my cares out to the world. Going up in the plane was like, I'm going as high as I can to meet God. I want to see who this God is. And this was first time I jumped was maybe around 15 years. No, less than around 10 years ago, maybe a little more than 10 years. And I said, I got to meet this God. So I went up, all my problems, and I just jumped. Didn't care if the parachute opened or not. And what I recognized in that experience was the free fall was how I was living my life. And it was like everything was just passing me by when you first jump. And when you open that parachute, it grabs you. And then you go into a peaceful glide.
Wow.
And the way I looked at it wasn't that my problems went away, but because it was a peaceful, controlled glide, I was able to determine where I was going to land. And I took that same analogy and started applying it to my life and to different business principles. Which problem will I address first? And once I learned how to address problems first, knowing that free fall comes in order to get to the ground, you got to go through something. And so as I was choosing where I was going to land, and once I directed it, I was able to focus. So when I hit the ground, it felt like I was, we talk about salvation and being saved. I got saved on that airplane flight.
Wow.
On that free fall.
Listen, that was a great analogy. I love that. And it just gave me something inside of me. I'm jumping out of a plane now. I'm a punk. I don't like roller coasters. I don't like jumping out of planes, none of that stuff. And anybody who want to do that, go ahead, but don't take me with you. So along this journey for you advocating for those with, mental illness, trying to find a way to get them to mental wellness, what's changed what has not changed, and what really needs change?
Well, there's a lot of things that have not changed.
Mm-hmm.
And, just recently, I was asked to present along, and whenever I go somewhere, and it's like sometimes these organizations will bring me on to speak. But what I often do, and like today at 12 o'clock, I have one. I often bring a clinician from the organization. I'm this board secretary for the Mental Health Association of Essex and Morris. And so I bring a clinician who can give the tools that people need. So when they walk away after hearing my story, you don't do what I did,
Right.
that you actually get some real help. And so when we talk about things that have changed, a lot has changed. One, when services weren't available years ago, we now have services. When folks didn't talk about mental health services, we now talk about them. When we talk about resources, we now talk about them, and so there's a lot that has changed, but more still needs to be done. And so when we look at budgeting, when we look at finance and the support, recently in the news, you had the conversations about cutting police budgets. But the reality is that African Americans are more prone to a violent interaction with the police officer than other races. And often when we look at certain situations, things are elevated for no reason. A lot of it is out of fear of the police officer and so forth. And so when we're dealing with mental health, um, they're suggesting now, which is a great thing, that counselors come on site with the police officers as they engage with people with diagnosed mental health conditions or when they see different behaviors. Case in point, in the town of West Orange, New Jersey, the Mental Health Association is partnered with the West Orange Police Department.
Oh,
And so when they go on cases dealing with crisis, we have a support person that goes along with the police. And so that model is a model that needs to be seen throughout the country, not just here in West Orange, New Jersey, but in Newark and all of these other metropolises, so that people can understand that. Think about a police officer. Here it is, a profession, someone who is sworn to serve and protect. Imagine the trauma. Now, we laugh at police. We say, oh, they just eat donuts and they do just lollygag and blah, blah, blah. But imagine the trauma that person goes through.
right.
Imagine the lack of experience they have in seeing the trauma that they see daily. Now, they may have a time where they may not have a major case or whatever, but you got to believe that next day one is coming. Imagine the murder rate. Imagine a police officer from a community. They go into the community to police and do their job, and they see their friend, their best friend's daughter or son shot. Imagine what they're going through. Now, check this out. Let me put the spin on it. So once they see those things, right, they have to process that some way. Now, if they say, hey, boss, sergeant, I'm having some anxieties as a result of seeing this all the time, watching my sons, my daughters get killed in these streets. As soon as he says that, the likelihood, the first thing they're going to do is pull his gun away and send him into counseling, give him a desk job. And so he's reduced from the responsibility that he wanted to do as a career. And so they say, well, I'm not going to talk about it because I already know that they're really not going to support me, my own police department. And so it's important that we look at life from a different lens these days, because mental health is just as essential as your cardiac issue, as your lung pulmonary issues. We talk about COVID, but think about all the mental health that's going to fall as a result of that. People getting laid off from their jobs, furloughed, sickness, the support of people who are losing healthy loved ones. Imagine what that's going to look like. And so there's a lot more redistribution of funding that needs to be allocated to meet the need that's coming forward, because the problem is already here. But we have to prepare. We can't be reactionary. We have to be ahead of the game.
Right.
And so what I tend to find is that often we just react. And part of the challenge, and I didn't want to go this route, but I'm going to have to. Part of the challenge is our elected officials. They spend so much time with partisan issues on both sides. that if you don't vote for this, I'm not going to vote for that. I'm not going to support this because it's on the other side of the aisle. And the reality is that the power brokers that control the power base are the ones who are really the problem, because they tend to elect incompetent people, not people who are conscious to the needs of the people, but they put incompetent people that keep them in power. And so what we have to keep in mind, that the legislation for people who deal with or suffer from mental health issues must be present. We have to deal with legislation and start pushing things to the forefront that are going to impact us in a positive way and address the issues, and not things that are just partisan, politically correct to keep other people in power. So there's a lot of things that still needs to be done. I'm just so happy for the work that the mental health community is doing with police departments and educating police officers, but also training them.
Right.
And going in, and also going into jails and having satellite units of your facility there to talk to the prisoners as well as the guards on things to look out for. And so that's one of the things that I am proud of with the changes, that we have more resources than ever, but we still need more. We still need more funding. We still need more education. We still need organizations out here who have the resources to make a difference. And when we're constantly fighting a political structure that is dealing with partisan politics, and so we're not going to pass this because we don't like that, and you're not supporting this, and blah, blah, blah. And half the politicians don't even know the issues anyway. So we have to hold them accountable and really push the issues. And not that it's a fault of their own, but we just have to educate people, and we have to be the leaders to speak our truth to power in order for other people to hear us and respect us. And unless we're doing it, it won't be heard.
That's stuff right there. That everything that you said just now makes so much sense. And just I want everybody to just hone in on something that you said, because this is so important. Police officers, we are in a space where a lot of us as Black people are angry because Black people are being killed by police officers. We do have to understand that there are police officers who are not killing Black people, and that our police officers need help. They need, after watching somebody get shot or shooting somebody, we're talking about police officers who have done it the right way, who have shot somebody. That's a lot of mental anguish, and they don't go home and talk about it because they don't want to bring work home. So we got to understand that our police officers, these funds need to go to giving them the mental health that they need, that they should be comfortable enough to come after a traumatic experience on the street where they've been shot at and all these things, where they can get the help that they need. So I'm glad that you brought that up, that they're human beings first.
Also, not so much whether or not they're doing the shooting or receiving the shooting, but they're walking into trauma. Right. Imagine the fireman who goes to a fire, and like when I was 14 years old, our house was set on fire. 2 of our loved ones died in the fire. I'm standing there homeless, watching my bodies come out of my house, in body bags. Imagine the trauma that the fireman goes through as well. And so it's not so much and only the gunshots in this, but it's the whole thing. The ambulance worker, right, who goes on scene, or the mortician, like I'm a mortician, who goes and have to embalm these bodies. Just imagine what people are going through, in their professions. And sure, we choose them because it's more like a mission. We feel as if it's God's calling on our life. But the reality, with that good comes bad. Right. And so no one person is Superman, Superwoman. And so we have to get to a point where we recognize there is a need for funding and services to be redistributed. And so it's not so much cutting the police budget, it's to redistribute funds that enhances the work that they're doing by providing mental health services to those officers within that department. Because what's happening when you provide services to them, you're providing it really to the community, and vice versa. Because when they go into the community, they don't really know how. A 2-year guy on the force. Look at George Floyd's death. Yeah. You had a sergeant with all these years, and everyone else was 5 years and under. I think one guy was less than a year on the job. And no way in the world will I ever stand there and allow a person, my colleague, to kill or take a life of a person but they just was out of fear listening to their sergeant for the most part, even though sure much more plays into that dynamic. But imagine if they don't have, and that's a good example of not having training and sensitivity training.
Right.
You know, you see someone like George Floyd maybe not all the way with it, at that time or whatever, but it doesn't warrant death.
Right.
It doesn't warrant excessive force, and so when you have those things that are the result of it, it's because of the perception that we have when we go to the scenes. And so, yeah, mental health is very important when it comes to policing. Mental health is very important when it comes to the community. Resources just have to be there. And we really have to stand up and hold our congressional people as well as our senators to the carpet and the
Right.
funding for those services and make them aware of it and demand it. And the way you do it is you go to the ballot box and you cast your vote.
Yes.
And I look at our congressman in this area, Congressman Donald Payne Jr., and I watch the work that he's doing when it comes to these things. As a personal friend, I hold him to the carpet. And so not only do I have my resources holding his office, and I watch the hard work that they do for the community. So, all of the congressional people, all of the senators, they're not just sitting around, but they do need to be educated on the issues, because you can't imagine our elected officials to know everything, because they don't come from knowing everything. They come from the private sector. And
Right.
so they get these jobs, and we have these falsehood beliefs that they know everything. They really don't. They know as you instruct them with the things that you're specializing in. Others going to talk about SBA, like I used to talk about SBA, and I would speak before a subcommittee there in Congress on the needs of SBA. So I came with my expertise in that area, other areas. So we have to educate our political leaders on what our emotional, mental, psychological needs are.
That's so good. And you said something earlier from the beginning of this.
You remember all this stuff without writing it down.
These things be coming in my head, but some of
You're
this stuff
good.
you said something earlier that just should hit home to everybody when you talked about your relationship with your dad, and you talked about the little boy inside of you, Mikey, the little boy inside of your dad, Donnie, right?
Yeah.
Every man on the police force, there's a little boy inside of him. On the fire department, there's a little boy inside of him. The
boy or girl.
Boy or girl, right, on the inside of him. The lady at the bank, that's a tailor. There's somebody, a little girl inside of her, who have all dealt with emotional trauma. Every person on this planet has dealt with emotional trauma. Not the same emotional trauma, but we have all dealt with some of it.
Sure.
And if those people who are police officers and firefighters have not dealt with that, that little boy and that little girl is on a job with them, and something can trigger. You know what I'm saying? Like, you went through a house fire as a young boy. So fires may be a trigger for you. So we just have to understand that everybody walking around has gone through trauma, and if they haven't gotten the proper help for that trauma, because for Black men, we're talking about in particular, have been taught that you don't need help. You're a man. As soon as y'all come out, it's a boy. All these expectations are put on y'all. You don't need help. Be strong. You fell, don't cry. Get up, try again.
I was about to say that.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at boys the way we're raised, and we fall, as you were saying, and we hit stub our toe or something, don't cry, man up.
Right.
And tear and pains are just real, our realities. And so when we are put into society and men don't cry, yes, we do. I mean, you just crying earlier. Here it is early in the morning, I'm crying. However, I found that we tend to normalize things, and that's the wrong part of what this whole stigma and mental health or lack of understanding about mental health in the community is really such a sad thing, because we normalize behaviors that we should not. Right. I remember at the age of 12, back in the 70s, I saw my first, it was Eddie Rogers, I believe, he got killed right outside school. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, Burgore Avenue School on the corner of Leslie and Burgore, shot in the head.
Oh.
12 years old. I'm watching a friend just got shot in the head. Wow. And when I have to see this back in the 70s, not to even talk about 2 more years, I would be homeless. But we tend to normalize things. And so when we start normalizing these behaviors, particularly in the inner city, and then we're already lacking a lot of resources. We're normalizing crime. We're justifying some things, and things that shouldn't be justified. And so when we have that normalization of trauma, our experiences, and sure, they say, well, kids can rebound easily, kids are resilient, there are these things. But when they're resilient, normalizing negative things, like I remember as a child, um, people say, what you want to be? And I say, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a mortician. Those are the only two goals I had. Others say, I want to be uh, um, a this or that. But now you're hearing kids, I want to sell drugs, I want to do this. And they start normalizing. Why? Because of what they're seeing. I remember the movie Moonlight. I think that's what it was. Moonlight. It was a movie out a couple of years ago, and it was about a young boy who idolized a drug dealer in his neighborhood. And it's really a beautiful love story. I think it was one of it actually won the Academy.
Oh,
Moonlight.
wow.
Moonlight is an independent movie. But anyway, this young kid from the community whose mom was being poisoned by drugs, was beat up as a kid by the neighborhood boys. He idolized a drug dealer, older guy, who took care of him and protected him. But he was the same guy who gave the mother the drugs. But
Wow.
he, as a kid, grows into an adult, normalizing behavior. He, as a kid, grows into an adult and a drug dealer himself. But what was beautiful and interesting about the story was that he found love in somebody who gave him love. And so even, I listened to Dupre, Kelly. He was one of my neighbors as a child, my little brother. You had him on your show, Do It All.
Yes.
We always go by his government, but, Do It All. And he was saying how in the neighborhood, we were able to find heroes amongst us. And so when I watched that movie, it was a love story, but yes, we found heroes. But the reality, some of those heroes, we normalize some of these behaviors to think that they're acceptable. And
Right.
I'm a guy of standard to say that some things are not acceptable, even though we've normalized them. And so that conditioning that we have to somehow unravel and start having pillars in our community who are willing to stand up for truth and bring it to power and speak truth to power. And we need people who look like me to talk about their pains, people who look like me to talk about their shortcomings. In a private session, me and DeLacy Davis, DeLacy is known as this advocate for the African American community. He's been on the grind since being a sergeant in East Orange back in the 90s. But he's been fighting for our rights for years. And I watched him and very proud of my brother, DeLacy. He just became a doctor in education. But when I watch his struggle and talk to him as a friend, I could hear his pains and see the similarities, even though he's radical than I, more radical. But we're really on the same plane. It's just how we outwardly show it. We've both been through the same trauma and we've seen the similar circumstances. But we know that we have to address these issues that affect us. And so as we look at us, we have to be willing to be that example for those kids that are following. And for me, the example that I've been setting is more about philanthropic things, meaning leave more than you take. And, it's not just a mantra, it's a movement, it's who I am. And it's who I think people need to be. I remember God never blessed me when my hand was closed. It was when I gave, when I opened up. And I didn't understand as a child. You go up in church and you pay tithes, 10% of your earnings to the church and all this other stuff. And I didn't understand mathematically, how am I going to benefit if I'm giving out? And once I understood that basic thing, it no longer was a burden to me. And the Lord, and I must say, the Lord opened up a window of heaven and poured me out a blessing. And so my life has been one of abundance, one of beauty. And it's only, and my story, I got these antique cars and all this other stuff. But it wasn't until I understood more of my purpose that I started selling my companies 3 years ago, laid off 60 something employees, because I wanted to be more what God made me for. And so now, for the first time, I have less money coming in. I still own stuff. I still own office buildings, residential stuff, all this other crap. But I'm hearing from God because I got rid of the distraction. And
Mm.
so all that stuff that would go on in my head, the self-doubt, the self hatred, lack of love, lack of trust, lack of belief in self, all that stuff no longer bothers me because I'm in a good place. That's where the exercise comes in. That's when the spirituality comes in. That's when better nutrition comes in, plenty of rest come in. And when I add those things, my mental health is far more better now than ever before. Money can't buy it. I had to find what William Michael Barbie is all about. And what I'm about is giving more than I take.
Mm. You're such a beautiful.
Pause.
You're such a beautiful person. Like you really are.
God bless you.
And I'm so glad that you are in my life. I really am. And
Same
I
here.
really appreciate you. And I've always said this about myself. And oh, this is one of my things that I realized. I said, I've always been a giver, so I've never gone without.
Mm.
And it took me about, I'm 50 now, about 45 years to realize that I've never really not had what I needed. Even when it was money, I've always had everything I needed because I've always been a giver and I'm always gonna be. I'm never gonna let anybody, because people get into the mindset of somebody did this to me and some I'm never gonna help anybody. I can't be that person. So abundance always flows toward me. So I'm gonna give you some words before we go because we have like 5 minutes left. And I just want you to tell me what comes to mind when I give you these words. Okay?
Uh-oh.
Self
Now
control.
you know I'm sometimes I'm off. So you give me something, I may say something off. Don't judge me. Go on.
Okay, first one, self control.
Self-control. You want a one-word answer?
No, I want you to, what comes to mind?
Discipline. You know, when I think about self-control, I think about discipline.
Okay, loyalty.
When I think about loyalty, it runs hand with discipline, a commitment, and it starts to me loyalty to self. I have to be true to myself before I can be true to anyone else.
Mm,
And often we walk around here and we give people what we think they want to hear, rather than being truthful to ourselves. So loyalty first hits home.
yes. Wealth.
Wealth. I used to think it was material, and up until a couple of years ago, you know, we always did seven figure. I mean, still doing decent, but we always did these numbers. And it wasn't until I needed more and it wasn't money that I understood wealth has very little to do with finance. And so wealth for me meant happiness and even more so contentment. And so, yes, so when I think about wealth, I think about contentment, being at peace. And, you know, I have a friend who went to art side with me, and she's always on social media talking about Zen. And to me, that's wealth. I
Yes. And the last
don't know
one,
what Zen is, but it's cute.
and it's just peace. You're right.
Yeah.
And the last one, man.
Man, humble, confident, leader, forgiving, forgiver, uh, weak, precious, sweet, happy, sad, human. Yeah, so I think when I think about man, it has to be all of those things. Those things define me. You know, often, you know, we hear the chauvinistic perspective of what a man is, and I tend to intentionally go against the grain of the typical definition of like men don't cry. Yeah, I cry, and you can't question my masculinity. Neither do I care what you think because I cry. I talk through my tears. They say men, like I was down in the South recently and I was listening to a friend just talk about, well, men do this and men do that and men do that. And I said, baby, who hurt you? You know, and so the perception that a lot of people, particularly women, have of the roles of men. Or when I listen to some women say, I'm gonna let you do this because this is what men do. The mere fact you're gonna let me do, you know, uh, I could go on, but men. When I think about men, I think about myself. I think about other humble. My godfather Ben Jones, man. My father Otha Donald Barbee, man. When I think about so many, my godfather Walter McNeil, who just passed, man. Tommy Robinson, man. When I think about my mother, woman, when I think about leadership, I just think man in the form of humility. Because anytime you have so much power, you got to know how to pull back and have that humility. You know, like Martin Luther King, the nonviolent approach, people always try to pin him against Malcolm. You needed both. But to me, it took the strength to not fight back. When I think about man, I think about John Lewis. Just last week, I drove to Alabama and I went on the Pettus Bridge down in Alabama because I wanted to see what Bloody Sunday's foundation, what it looked like. So it took a man, John Lewis, leading that march. And so a man is one of humility. I remember driving John Lewis around in my car when he came north, and he would sit off to the side with his seatbelt on in the back seat. And my brother, and called me his brother. I'm like, nah, you're like our father, man. You know, but he was such a sweet man, you know. So he was a man.
Yes.
He was a man. He was a man.
So before we go, just tell me about your new book.
Oh, yes. Well, the new book is called The Perfect Storm, Collision of Three Elements: Racism, Trump, and COVID. And that was basically birthed out of me going through all of my mental health challenges with this anxiety as a result of the COVID. And so I've always learned how to go inward to find the strength, because we all have all our tools within. Um, Carol Lucas always talking about that. Iyanla Vanzant, she speaks about it. I've even heard you speak about it back in the day. We have everything that we need on the inside, you know, to succeed. And so while I was going through the COVID stuff, I started writing, and I used that because I write movie script, I write this, I write that. And I said, no, I need to write my pains. And that started with Dr. Shelley Niederback 33 years ago when all of this stuff began. My healing began with my psychotherapist. And so I started writing what I was experiencing as a man. And I realized that some of the things that I'm experiencing, it goes to the subject you're talking about, which is the mental health component. I had to look at Donald Trump, not from the position that the majority of us love to just say, Donald Trump is this, Donald Trump is that, but look at the system that birthed a person like him. And so when we look at the system that birthed the person like him, we have to look at his family and how he was given all of these things and behaviors, just like in the inner city, in the wealthy environment, they got the same trash and it exhibits differently because of money, power, and white supremacy, okay? And so then we have to look at the system within the political structure that can resent an African-American man like a Barack Obama that says we need to do anything other than have another black man or a black person in office. So they find that echo within their community that speaks their language. And that's what birthed Donald Trump to the forefront. And so he was able to benefit from a broken system of government. And so what I'm suggesting in this book is that, yes, one, we look at a historical perspective of race, because this is what we've been seeing in America today, from slavery on up, and see the parallels. Like when I think about the Emancipation Proclamation, 1865 with Abraham Lincoln, and I thought about when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and then the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery except for in the criminal justice system. And when I started thinking about that, all this is in the book. When I started thinking about that, I started thinking about racial profiling, and not so much the word mass incarceration, but the disproportionate number of African Americans who are incarcerated. I had to think that the 1865 with the 13th Amendment, I had to believe that that was the foundation by which racial profiling began. So I have to unravel that and bring it to the forefront because it's on the books. And so how can I not address the issues that we have today without making a correlation to where they were birthed from? Because then when we had Reconstruction, and we had all of these things that started coming along, and then blacks were in power in politics. And in South Carolina, Beaufort, you had some real great things. In Kansas, you had a whole lot of things that were happening for black people. But the reality is that the government structure targeted those same blacks that were once free. They targeted by allowing the Confederate guys, they forgave them and then gave them back the land and made the blacks who owned this stuff sharecroppers. Let me say one more thing about the book, and I know you got to go.
It's okay.
And so while doing all of this research on who we are as a people and looking at the plights we're facing today and why blacks are targeted today, I had to look at the structure of the government in the United States of America, and see how we're ruled by old white men. And we've been ruled in Senate by old white men. I had to think about things. And I was forced to do my own research, and I did this ancestry DNA thing while doing this book, right? And I found out a strange thing. Now, I thought only white people came through Ellis Island. Just last week, doing my research, my mother's grandmother, her name was Louise Claiborne, she came from a port in France to the United States through Ellis Island at the age of 12. We're still doing the research. At the age of 12, a black woman came to Ellis Island at the age of 12 in 1894. My great-great-grandmother came that way and somehow met with my grandfather, who was down in the South, who was born, listen, my great-great-grandfather's name was William Fields. He was born, I believe it was 1865. 1865 was very pivotal. Why? Because Emancipation Proclamation, assassination of Lincoln, 13th Amendment, my great-great-grandfather. And so I'm doing all this research to find out who I am, to better understand how I can be of a better blessing to my people in the community. So dealing with all of this, Trump plays a role in it, not that he's the pillar, but the reality, we have a broken system, whether it's Democrat, Republicans in the Senate and Congress, who have stalemates that don't allow the checks and balances, whether you have three forms of government that are not balancing out fair. Why? Because I believe there's an issue of white supremacy in America that's dominating things. And so when we have a challenge to that, the power brokers tend to buck. And so I believe that I have to bring this stuff to the forefront to show the correlation why Donald Trump is so pivotal. Look, he has this coronavirus, and I just pray that he does well, that he, his family, and everyone else recover. I'm not one who's hating on the man. I dislike a lot about him. However, I wish no harm on anyone. There's good somewhere in everyone, or the potential, because he's without sin, let him cast the first stone. And so when I look at a Donald Trump, and I look at COVID, and I look at the way he's been irresponsible, not wearing a mask and spreading this coronavirus all over the world, all over these people who are just coming because of they talk about mental health, narcissism. Look at the definition of narcissism. Look at Donald Trump's behavior. Yes. It'll scare you to know that our government is so broken that they could bring a person like that to power.
Right.
And retain them in power. And so when we talk about look, this book is really the best writing of my life. And it was still a childhood friend, but not really a childhood friend. He was my teacher, Joe Palestina. He was my English teacher. Only find out that he had a deep passion for American history. And to listen to him, know the story of African American history, and African history. He's been able to challenge me. I haven't been challenged this much. Man, I thought my book was coming out like months ago. I said, hey, I need help. I really need you. I really pleaded with him. And he calls me MB or WMB. He said, send it over. And I sent it over. And he went through my manuscript and I thought I was in school, and I was doing all this research. And I found myself really finding that there's a connection between racism, Trump, and COVID.
Wow.
And to me, those three elements become the perfect storm. And that's the name of the book, The Perfect Storm, a collision of three elements.
Perfect perfect storm. I can't wait to read it. I'm excited about it. I'm sure the listeners are excited about it. So I want you to tell everybody where they can find you so that we can get this book when it comes out and your other books.
Okay, so my name, I always hid behind my companies because like people didn't know I own Prestige Tours and all these other companies all these years. And even like the real estate, they it's under a different name, United Care Properties. But maybe 3 years ago, as the Lord was leading me in one direction, I was also instructed to brand my name.
Yes.
So on every platform, whether it's www.williammichaelbarbee.com or anything you Google, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, it's still WilliamMichaelBarbee.com. William Michael Barbee. Just Google that. You'll find everything you need to know on me. You'll be able to reach me and you'll see the resources. So the books are available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com. When this next book comes out, hopefully in a month, I should be finished with it. I wanted to do it before the election, but I may not finish it by the election because of this rich history I've been forced to tackle. But that book, Collision of Three Elements, Perfect Storm, A Collision of Three Elements, Racism, Trump, and COVID. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. It's William Michael Barbee. Last name is Barbee. I'll make sure y'all know Barbee, and you will find him if you Google him. And he is a wealth of knowledge, and I suggest that you follow him. I highly encourage that you follow him, because if you see the beautiful person that he is and the educated person that he is, and he just is not putting things out there for you. He's actually doing the research, because a lot of people just talk the talk and don't walk the walk. They don't go through the research, and it's a mess when you find out. And to have somebody to come on board and challenge you to say, I need you to tell me where you got this from, is a blessing in itself. So I thank you all for tuning into my Men Hurt 2 series. You can find me at All Things Trey Kearney, TrayKearney. I thank you, William Michael Barbee, for just being in my life for so many years, and the story goes so far back. And I love you because you came in my life at a time when me and Steve.
Don't I remember?
and it's so funny.
That could be a movie. Your life, that time? No, people talk about the rap game and LA and all this other crap. No, you lived it.
Yes. So, and I thank you so much for bringing me.
Suge Knight ain't no mystery. You lived it.
Right. And I thank you so much for bringing me home, because we were in a situation, and we'll talk about that. Maybe we will.
But those are other friends who brought me into the situation because of the resources I may have had at the time.
Right.
And but that's how we forced it. But you lived a life.
Yeah, I did out there.
Wow.
In LA. I'm not an LA person for that reason.
You could talk about captivity, baby. You could talk about all of those things, escaping life, death. People see your, I know you got to go, but people see your outward and they don't know your inward. They don't know your story, man. They don't know your story. And there are many of stories that you have to tell. They just see the beauty, the laugh. You talk about autism, you talk about your sons, your young men. They see Black men are dope. Yeah, we are dope. Yes. But people don't know your story. That in and of itself, in the right hands, sit down. I mean, I'm a filmmaker, but sit down with somebody or yourself. Yes, and start writing that story out, man. You got a story. You got many stories, but I like that one.
Yeah, I'll think about it. So I love y'all. We thank y'all for tuning in. Remember what I tell you at the end of all my broadcasts. You deserve the best. Yes, I'm talking to you. You deserve the best. Now go get it. Peace and blessings. And remember Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Thank you, Dr. William Michael Barbee.
Jesus.
Yeah. I will see you soon. So thank you guys.
All right, God bless. Peace.
I'll see you guys next Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the series Men Hurt 2. Have a great week. Peace.
Peace.